A potential economic shockwave is building in Washington, D.C., as policymakers and citizens alike brace for what could be a defining moment in U.S. economic history. Former President Donald Trump has put forward a bold and controversial proposal, a universal tariff of at least 10% on all imports entering the United States, directly challenging decades of carefully negotiated trade agreements and established global economic norms. This sweeping move could fundamentally reshape the global economy, driving up prices on American shelves, disrupting supply chains, and potentially triggering swift retaliatory measures from other nations. The stakes are incredibly high, extending far beyond simple economics, as this policy could redefine America's relationships with its allies and trading partners around the world. However, this ambitious plan faces a formidable obstacle, none other than the United States Supreme Court, which stands as a critical check on presidential power. The legality of such sweeping presidential action on trade is a major constitutional question, raising issues about the separation of powers and the limits of executive authority. The court is now positioned as the ultimate arbiter in a high-stakes showdown between executive power and congressional authority, with the eyes of the nation watching closely. Its decisions could either greenlight Trump's sweeping vision for American trade or erect a significant legal barrier that could halt the plan in its tracks. This legal battle is about more than just tariffs. It's about the fundamental limits of presidential power, and the outcome will have lasting implications for the future of American governance. As of September 30, 2025, businesses, investors, and consumers worldwide are anxiously awaiting the outcome, knowing that their livelihoods and financial futures may hang in the balance. The clash between Trump's economic nationalism and the Supreme Court's careful scrutiny is pivotal, not just for global trade, but for the delicate balance of power within the United States itself. The decisions made in Washington will echo across the globe, impacting wallets, jobs, and diplomatic ties from Main Street America to the bustling streets of Beijing, shaping the world for years to come. To understand the current situation, we must look back at Trump's presidency from 2017 to 2021, where tariffs were central to his America First policy. He imposed tariffs on goods like steel and aluminum, sparking a trade war as trading partners retaliated. Legal challenges arose, questioning the constitutionality of these tariffs and setting the stage for future court battles. Trump's administration used Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, citing national security, a controversial justification. Courts hesitated to second-guess national security claims, allowing many tariffs to remain, but leaving constitutional questions unresolved. The legacy of these battles is crucial for today's showdown. Trump's team learned to frame trade actions as national security matters, providing a strong defense against judicial review. This history informs their current strategy to make future tariffs resilient to legal challenges. The unresolved debates from his first term set the stage for a larger confrontation at the Supreme Court. Trump's advisors are crafting a legal fortress around a potential second-term tariff plan. Their goal is to design a strategy that withstands federal court challenges up to the Supreme Court. They focus on a broad interpretation of presidential authority in national security and foreign policy. By framing economic stability as national security, they hope to gain judicial deference. Critics argue this expands executive power, sidestepping Congress's role in commerce regulation. This sets up a constitutional question for the Supreme Court: the balance between presidential duty and congressional authority. The Supreme Court's 2025 term includes cases impacting Trump's tariff ambitions. American Lighthizer versus U.S. Steel questions presidential power to modify tariffs set by Congress. Seco Logistics versus United States challenges the broad use of national security under Section 232. A ruling for businesses could weaken Trump's legal foundation, requiring concrete security threats. The key arguments center on separation of powers, with Congress's commerce regulation at stake. The court's conservative majority adds unpredictability, with potential sympathy for a strong executive. Preliminary case rulings will signal how the court might approach a direct challenge to Trump's tariff plan. If Trump's proposed tariffs are implemented, the economic impact would be immediate, widespread, and deeply felt across multiple sectors. The effects would ripple through the U.S. economy, touching everything from Wall Street to Main Street, and even reaching far beyond American borders. For American consumers, higher prices on everyday goods would act as a hidden tax, squeezing household budgets. This could lead to inflation, eroding purchasing power, and making it harder for families to afford basic necessities. Over time, this persistent rise in costs could dampen consumer confidence and slow economic growth. Some domestic industries, especially those competing with foreign imports, might see a short-term boost. Increased production and job growth could follow, as companies ramp up to meet demand for American-made goods. This could be a welcome change for workers in certain sectors, at least initially. However, economists warn that these gains would likely be offset by significant losses in industries that rely heavily on imported materials or products. Businesses facing higher input costs may be forced to cut jobs, reduce hours, or even close their doors. On the global stage, the consequences would be dramatic. Trading partners would almost certainly retaliate, imposing their own tariffs and targeting key U.S. exports, escalating trade tensions and sparking disputes that could last for years. The agricultural sector, already vulnerable to market fluctuations, could face devastating impacts. Farmers might lose access to crucial export markets, leading to unsold crops, falling incomes, and increased financial stress in rural communities. Global supply chains would be thrown into disarray, increasing costs and causing delays for U.S. companies that depend on imported parts and materials. This disruption could slow production and reduce competitiveness. Most economic analyses predict a net negative effect for both the U.S. and the global economy. The uncertainty and volatility could undermine growth, shake investor confidence, and trigger market sell-offs. A universal 10% tariff could reduce U.S. GDP, cost thousands of jobs, and push more businesses to the brink of closure, especially small and medium-sized enterprises. While a handful of industries might emerge as winners, the vast majority of businesses and consumers would bear the brunt of the pain, facing higher costs and fewer opportunities. The resulting trade war would create a climate of uncertainty, discouraging investment, stalling business expansion, and increasing the risk of a recession both in the U.S. and abroad. The economic landscape would shift dramatically, with global trade routes and alliances being redrawn. Companies and countries alike would be forced to adapt to a new, more unpredictable reality. The stakes are high, with potential long-term consequences for international relations, economic stability, and the future of global cooperation. The world would be watching closely as the effects unfold. The Supreme Court's decisions on tariffs will shift the balance of power in Washington. A ruling for broad presidential authority would empower Trump, validating his agenda without Congress. Conversely, limiting presidential power would reaffirm Congress's trade regulation role. This would complicate future tariff proposals requiring legislative approval. Political fallout would affect Americans, with potential benefits for protected industries and challenges for others. The court's involvement turns this economic debate into a fundamental governance question. Legal scholars are divided on the Supreme Court's potential ruling. Professor Lawrence Tribe argues the Constitution grants Congress trade power, predicting conservative textualists may side with Congress. John Yoo suggests history favors presidential discretion in foreign affairs, including trade. Trade economists warn of negative consequences, with tariffs raising prices and isolating the U.S. Political analysts see the tariff plan as a gamble, risking alienation of swing voters. Advocacy groups highlight tariffs as a hidden tax on families, while steelworker unions support them for job protection. These perspectives illustrate the complex trade-offs involved. The Supreme Court's decision will have significant implications for the economy and political landscape. The tariff debate impacts ordinary lives, with a direct effect on family budgets. A 10% tariff would increase costs for goods, pressuring low and middle-income households. For some, like steelworkers, tariffs offer job security and community revitalization. However, others, like farmers, face risks from retaliatory tariffs threatening their livelihoods. The human dilemma is central to the debate, with no simple solution benefiting everyone. The stories of workers and families represent the American experience. As the Supreme Court considers the legal framework, human consequences are the true stakes. The outcome will shape law and policy, influencing financial security for millions. The decision will impact diverse communities, highlighting the interconnectedness of the global economy. The stakes are high, with potential long-term effects on American industries and consumers. The tariff debate underscores the complexity of balancing economic interests and governance. We are at a historic crossroads, a pivotal point in our nation's story that will be remembered for years to come. The Supreme Court showdown over Trump's tariff plan is not just a legal battle. It's a defining moment that will shape America's economic future and the balance of power in our government. The court's decision will determine the extent of presidential power in trade policy, setting a precedent for future leaders. This ruling will ripple through the global economy and influence how the U.S. is governed, affecting markets and international relationships. A decision favoring expansive executive power could usher in a new era of economic nationalism, potentially resulting in higher consumer prices, increased tariffs, and greater market uncertainty for businesses and families alike. Conversely, reaffirming Congress's authority would preserve the current system of checks and balances, but some may see it as a roadblock to swift action in protecting American jobs and industries from global competition. The verdict will directly affect our wallets, the availability of goods, and the health of local industries in every community. The principles being debated are the very bedrock of our democracy, with the potential to set long-lasting legal and political precedent. That's why it's crucial for all of us to stay informed and engaged, participating in the conversation as history unfolds. Understanding the potential impact on our communities and the country as a whole is more important than ever. The Supreme Court's decision will echo not only across the nation, but around the world, influencing economies and democracies everywhere. The outcome is about much more than tariffs or trade policy. It's about the kind of country and world we will live in, and the values we choose to uphold. This moment truly matters to everyone, regardless of background or beliefs, shaping the future of governance, economic policy, and the everyday lives of millions of people.